June Hartley fled the altar barefoot, her wedding dress torn, her mother's necklace clutched to her chest as a freight train screeched into the night. 3 days later, she stepped off into a ghost-quiet town, only to lock eyes with a silent rancher whose past was carved deeper than his scars. He didn't ask her name. He just handed her his coat. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The lace of June's dress itched against her arms, not from the fabric, but from the weight of meaning stitched into every thread by hands now buried beneath wildflowers. Her mother had sewn it one spring as if she knew it would be worn with trembling hands, not joy. June could still remember the needle pricking her mother's finger, the spot of blood carefully blotted with a rag, and the way she'd smiled anyway, tired, soft, knowing. That same smile haunted June's mind as she gripped the edges of the church pew to keep from shaking. Outside the window, bells tolled. Not wedding bells, just the noon hour, but their clang sounded like a verdict, in her father's voice, in the town's eyes. They all agreed. 32 was the cliff, and June had reached its edge. The banker waiting at the altar was not cruel, only practical. He spoke of ledgers, not love. He smiled with politeness, not passion. Her father's hand on her back as she dressed that morning had felt more like a nudge toward livestock pens than a blessing. She fled through the servants' corridor, mud swallowing her heels, then her bare feet. A gardener shouted. She didn't turn. Her lungs burned as she ran, not just from exertion, but from years of silence suddenly exhaled. She ran past town lines, past decorum, past the life that had always felt a size too tight. By the time she reached the station, her hair clung to her cheeks and her stockings were torn. The porter asked no questions. Her coins were good. She boarded a westbound train with nothing but a carpet bag, her mother's necklace, and a shaking she didn't yet know was freedom trying to take hold. Birch Falls came like a whisper at the end of the line. No brass band, no bustle. Just dust, horses, and a clock tower stuck 5 minutes slow. And there, Coulter Ridge, a man shaped by solitude, with the gait of someone who'd lost more than he spoke of. The way he looked at her, not like a man measuring a woman, but like one recognizing another soul undone, made her feel, for a flicker of a second, seen. That night, in the bakery's storeroom, June folded her dress beneath her like it might still hold a prayer. She stared at the ceiling beams as flour dust settled into her hair. She was no one's bride, no one's possession, and though she had no map, no kin, no plan, she had silence. Blessed, honest, unpromised silence. And in it, she breathed for the first time in years. The first frost came early to Birch Falls that year, painting the window panes in silver feathers and biting through floorboards with cold, sharp as bone. Inside the bakery's back room, June moved with mechanical precision, kneading, sweeping, folding, her fingers raw from heat, then chill, then heat again. The townsfolk came and went with the rhythm of habit, but their eyes spoke in place of their mouths. Some nodded politely, others let their glances linger too long, dipped in curiosity, dressed as judgment. She don't wear a ring. Hasn't even got family here. Who just shows up like that? The words reached her in fragments, but never directly. Birch Falls was too small for confrontation, and too proud for kindness without condition. The baker's wife, Ruthie, once warm as tea left steeping, now held her smiles like secrets, offered if asked, never volunteered. She left tasks undone that June might finish, praise unspoken that June might yearn for. Not cruelty, not malice. Just the slow retreat of trust into silence. Still, June endured it. Not stoically, not saintly, but deliberately. The way a woman does when she's spent her life being told to apologize for simply existing. She'd scrub the soot from the hearth till her knuckles ached, not for approval, but for the dignity of doing something well. And when the day's noise quieted into the hush of dough rising and wind moaning under the eaves, she would sit by the tiny oil lamp and trace her mother's handwriting with a trembling finger. Your heart was made for more than keeping peace with cowards. Coulter came like the weather, predictable in his unpredictability. He spoke only when necessary, and even then as if each word cost him something dear. His presence was never invasive, never pressing, and yet it lingered. A coil of twine left on the back step. A pail of firewood outside the door. The salve, thick, pine-scented, homemade, appeared on a morning her hands bled from scrubbing. He never asked for thanks. It would have embarrassed them both. That afternoon in the windstorm, she felt the cold not on her skin, but in her bones. The kind of chill that reminds a person they are, in fact, quite alone. Until that wagon slowed beside her. Until that coat wrapped around her shoulders like a memory she hadn't known she'd forgotten. Its weight was steadying. Its scent familiar in the way only safety can be. She stitched the tear by lantern light, hands moving slower than they had in years. Every loop of thread a quiet answer to the ache that had no name. The wind softened with the coming of spring, but the townsfolk of Birch Falls moved no faster for it. Birch trees budded, soil cracked open like tired skin, and June, for the first time in years, found rhythm in repetition. Hem by hem, collar by collar, she stitched her way into the lives of those who had once turned their backs. A seamstress by need, not trade, she handled each garment like a secret, gently, without judgment. Bloodstains from ranch hands, torn lace from a girl who had danced too hard, frayed sleeves of a widow who'd never remarried. People brought her pieces of themselves, and she handed them back whole. They didn't speak much. Birch Falls never did. But coins were left without haggle. Buttons slipped into her palm with nods of quiet thanks. And when a boy left a bouquet of wild asters on her windowsill, bound with baling twine, she didn't cry. But the stitching in her next seam trembled. It was on a Tuesday that Coulter brought the box. The sky had just turned lavender, dusk pouring like ink through the bakery windows. He said nothing when he handed it to her, only rested it on her mending table as though setting down something fragile that had waited too long. "Figured you read," he muttered. "You listen like someone who does." June opened it slowly. The spines were cracked, the pages warped by years of damp air and handling. But it was the Jane Eyre that stilled her hand. Inside, a child's looping scrawl. Coulter Ridge, age 11. She pressed her fingers to the name, then glanced up. His face had the stillness of someone who'd braced himself for rejection. She made tea. They sat in silence, the kind that doesn't require filling. Only steam rose between them, curling like smoke from a hearth. Then, gradually, carefully, came words. Hers first, of her mother's death, of the wedding that wasn't, of the life she'd been told she should be grateful for, even as it hollowed her out. Coulter listened, not with nods, but with stillness. A man who understood that words, once spoken, could bruise. When he spoke of his wife and son, it was like unearthing stone from frost. Their names didn't come easily. Neither did the admission. Built their coffins myself. June didn't touch his hand. She didn't need to. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It held weight, like soil over roots. The next morning she began cutting fabric. Her wedding dress, his patched coat, bits of old flannel and a strip of blue chambray. She stitched not to preserve but to transform. A quilt warm and unspoken, pieced from memory, grief, and something just beginning to resemble hope. The pasture had turned gold with morning light when June stepped through the wooden gate at Ridge Ranch. Dew still clung to the grass like fine embroidery, catching at her hem as she walked, but she didn't lift her skirt. Let it carry the earth with it, she thought. Let it remember where she's been. The dress she wore was patchworked with care. Rust, faded rose, muted indigo, stitched from remnants of old cloth, worn memories given new shape. It fit her not just in form, but in spirit. It was not a dress of beginnings, nor of endings, but of continuance. The pie basket in her hand was still warm, but it wasn't the pie people noticed. It was the way she moved through them, quietly, without apology, with a softness that didn't ask for permission. Children, unburdened by their parents' whispered histories, tugged at her skirt and asked if she'd brought jam. She nodded and smiled. Old men touched their hats as she passed. And Ruthie, the baker's wife who had once offered less and less of herself, wrapped her arms around June in a wordless embrace that said more than gossip ever could. Coulter met her by the fence, his hand already extended. She didn't hesitate. His fingers were rough, warm, familiar. They said what he rarely did out loud. "You belong." He led her through the field where mares grazed and new life trembled on unsteady legs. Under a birch tree strung with morning shadows, a colt, slick with afterbirth and determination, pushed against the earth. Its legs buckled once, twice. Then it stood, wobbling, shaking, but standing. Coulter's voice was low, steady. "Takes a while," he said. June watched, breath caught behind her ribs. "And when they do?" He didn't look at her when he answered. "They don't fall the same again." That night, when she returned home, June sat by the quilt she had once made from the ruins of two lives. She ran her hand across the seams, wetting silk beside sun-faded cotton, his coat against her lace. It no longer felt like salvage. It felt like testimony. Weeks later, when Coulter asked her to stay, he did so without adornment. Just truth, just light. And when they wed beneath the birches, there were no vows spoken loudly, no witnesses holding their breath for spectacle. Only wind, petals, and the quiet certainty of two people no longer bracing against the world. June didn't smile like a bride. She smiled like a woman who had finally recognized her own reflection, whole, scarred, and unashamed. A woman who no longer feared falling, because she had already learned how to stand.